After back-to-back wins over Ohio State the last 2 years, back-to-back Big Ten East titles, back-to-back Big Ten titles, back-to-back trips to the playoffs, and back-to-back losses in the first round of the playoffs, Jim Harbaugh and the Michigan Wolverines have been rewarded. Harbaugh only has to coach 8 regular season games this year instead of 12. In today's video, we're going to do a preview and a prediction game by game for the 2023 Michigan Wolverines football team. Let's go. Yeah, good morning. That is Uncle Lou here. Yeah, that's right. It's me, Uncle Lou, live on LouTube for you. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it also, and in addition to that as well. Hey, make sure you subscribe to this channel if you're not already. I post college football videos almost every single day of the year, and believe it or not, some of them are even watchable. I don't know about this one. You're going to have to let me know in the comments down below what you think about this one at the end. Let me know what you think about the record prediction that I give at the end, too. I've done a whole series of these videos. I think we've done about 15 teams so far. Going to do probably at least another 15 before the start of the season, but we just kind of break down the coaching staff and the roster, what's changed from last year to this year. And then we're going to put Michigan's schedule up on the screen, and I'll go through it game by game and try to give you a winner and a loser for every single week. Big shout out to everybody over on the Uncle Lou Patreon page. Without the Patreon page, I would not be able to do this year-round. So I really appreciate the help and support y'all give me over there on the Patreon page. But I want to give a special shout-out to Sean M., Tate, and Nate the Great. Those three wanted to see a Michigan preview and prediction video, so I hope y'all enjoy today's video. We are going to do Michigan. If you are on the Uncle Lou Patreon page and you have not been over there and left a comment, let me know what team you want to do a prediction for. You need to do that soon. The season is going to be here before you know it. I know we still got about a month or so before the start of the season, but it's going to go by really, really quick. The first post on my Patreon page is about these prediction videos. So when you go over there, click that post, leave me a comment, let me know what team it is you want to see me do one of these prediction videos for. If you're not yet signed up on the Uncle Lou Patreon page and you want to check it out, there's a link in the description of this video that'll take you there. You can let me know what team it is you want to see me do a preview and prediction video for, and we'll be sure and get it knocked out. And don't forget, the game streams will be starting, like I mentioned, in about a month, so make sure you get yourself signed up. All right, here we go, the Michigan Wolverines, and I sort of made a little joke about it at the beginning, but we might as well go ahead and get this out of the way. But it does look like Jim Harbaugh is going to be suspended for the first 4 games of the 2023 season. Kind of a negotiated plea deal, if you will, between Michigan, the NCAA, and Jim Harbaugh. He was accused of some recruiting violations, most stemming around some COVID protocols that had been put in place back in 2020. And as the NCAA was investigating these claims around Jim Harbaugh, some other coaches in the football program, Jim Harbaugh was, I guess, caught lying or not telling the full truth to some NCAA investigators, and that's actually what ended up getting him in trouble. And this is kind of one of those phrases we've sort of heard all your life, that it's, the cover-up is worse than the crime. What he was accused of is not really that big of a deal, It's like illegal contact with recruits during COVID when you weren't supposed to or whatever. It's the lying that got him in trouble. So, it's not that big of a deal. You'll see when we put Michigan's schedule up here in a second. Me, you, or pretty much anybody else watching this video could probably roam the sidelines as Michigan's head coach during those first 4 games, and Michigan would be just fine. But nevertheless, I thought I would mention that and get it out of the way, since it is news that has been breaking over the last couple of days, and we're doing the Michigan prediction video today. Don't lie to the NCAA. All right, let's briefly wrap up 2022 for Michigan before we move on to 2023. I think everybody knows the story of 2022 Michigan. Of course, they went undefeated in the regular season, beating Ohio State for the second year in a row, like I mentioned at the top of the video, winning the Big Ten East, the Big Ten, and making the playoffs, where they went on to lose in the first round, disappointingly, to TCU. Losing to Georgia in the first round of the playoffs a couple of years ago, not that big of a surprise to most college football fans. Georgia considered the best team a couple of years ago all season long. They were a considerable favorite over Michigan, and they did beat Michigan. Michigan should have beat TCU last. I know I'm stating the obvious here, but they were a significant favorite. They're a better team than TCU. If they played TCU 10 times, Michigan would beat them 9 times. All of those things are true, but you only get to play the game once, and TCU came out on top with a win over Michigan. So very rarely that you make the playoffs, I think, and still considered a disappointing season. But considering the fact that this was Michigan's second year in a row making the playoffs, and honestly, no disrespect to TCU, but because it was TCU that they lost to, it does come off or seem a little disappointing there at the end. But they completely blew through their regular season schedule undefeated, really only tested twice during the season. Early on in the season on the road at actually it was a home game, I believe, against Maryland. Ended up with a 7-point win. I think they were trailing at halftime, or it was close at halftime or something. But ended up winning 34-27. So just a 7-point, a 1-touchdown win there. And then late in the year, right before the Ohio State game, so sort of classic trap game scenario here. Again at home, this time against Illinois, escaping narrowly with a 2-point win, 19-17. A game they easily could have lost. Now it turns out it wouldn't necessarily have mattered, because they still beat Ohio State the next week, so they still would have ended up winning the Big Ten East, but nevertheless, they wouldn't have been undefeated. But anyway, went undefeated in the regular season, only tested a couple of times. The rest of their games were blowouts. You start to look at the score, including Ohio State, which of course was 45-23, but some of their other, 51-7, 56-10, 59-0. 27-14, 31-10, 41-17, 29-7, 52-17. I mean, they just ran through the Big Ten last year, with the exception of Maryland and Illinois, which were a little bit closer than a lot of people expected. Blew out Purdue, right, in the Big Ten title game, and then, of course, it was the TCU game we just talked about. So, overall, a good year. Ended a little disappointing. Let's look at some numbers for Michigan heading into now 2023, and then we're going to take a look at the roster, both offensive and defensive. What have they lost? Who's coming back? Where have they improved? Where maybe have they taken a step back from last year to this year? We'll talk about all those kinds of things. But here's a set of numbers I've looked at for every single team so far that we've done with these preview and prediction videos, and I'll put a list up of teams that we've done so far if I haven't done it already. I'm in the video, and you feel free to scroll back and click and check out my predictions on some of those other teams if you're interested. But where do I have Michigan ranked heading into 2023? Now, I do 3 different offseason top 25 rankings every year, every offseason. I do one after signing days wrap up in February. I do one after all the spring practices and the spring games have been played in April. That's the most recent ranking I have now, the one you'll see in a second. And then I do a final sort of preseason ranking the first or second week of August every year that'll be coming up in about a week or so. So I still have one more update to do to this ranking in the offseason, but right now I've got Michigan at number 2 in my top 25 ranking. And to be completely honest with you, I don't think any other, to me, Georgia should probably be ranked number 1 in almost everyone's ranking. Michigan, though, I feel like you could probably make a case for Michigan to have a number 1 ranking. And I don't think you can say that about any other team. I guess I'll just speak for myself personally. Other than Georgia and Michigan, I wouldn't consider putting anybody at number 1. And that'll be the case when I update the ranking here in a week or two. It'll either be Georgia or Michigan. Georgia and Michigan will be 1 and 2. I think there's obviously several other really good, maybe even great teams in college football in 2023, but it's hard for me to make a case for anyone other than Georgia or Michigan being number 1. This is based on, what they did last year, who's coming back, who they lost, their schedule upcoming this year, their projected wins for this coming year, their chances to make the playoffs. Any type of metric you want to look at, I think Georgia and Michigan clearly deserve to be the top 2 ranked teams heading into 2023. I've got Michigan at number 2. Nationally, where is Michigan ranked? Well, number 2 in a lot of rankings. I did find them 3rd and 4th in some rankings, but it's sort of kind of the further you get away from number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the further you get away, the less polls or the less rankings you find Michigan that far down. Michigan is 2 in most rankings that I saw. 3 and a few more, 4 and even less than that, 5 and even less than that. You got kind of what I'm saying, mostly in the 2 to 4 range, though. What about a win total for Michigan? How many wins is Michigan expected to have in 2023? Now, this is a betting number, so according to Vegas, according to the sports books, according to people who are willing to put money on these types of things, how many games is Michigan expected to win in the regular season in 2023? Again, they play a 12-game regular season schedule. Their win total, 10.5. Again, this is a betting number. I know you can't win 10.5 games, so you're either betting over 10.5 or under 10.5. That's how these numbers work. So if you think Michigan's going 11-1 or 12-0, you would bet over that 10.5 number. If you think they're going 10-2, 9-3 or worse, you would bet under that 10.5 number. So expected win total for Michigan, 10.5. What about Heisman Trophy candidates for Michigan? Well, you start with the obvious, which got, quarterback Blake or J.J. McCarthy. And his odds are actually at plus 1,800, puts him 10th on the list. Pretty good. So a top 10 guy, at least odds-wise, heading into the season for the Heisman Trophy for Michigan quarterback J.J. McCarthy. Now, the running back situations, of course, you have Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards. Blake Corum is on this list at 16th. He's the highest-ranked running back, plus 2,800. 16th on the list in terms of Heisman odds. So McCarthy and Corum, the two favorites, if you want to call it that, for as far as a Heisman goes for Michigan, at least in terms of the betting odds right now. What about winning the Big Ten for not one, not two, what would be 3 years in a row for the Michigan Wolverines? Well, they're actually the favorite to do just that. They are tied with Ohio State in terms of odds at plus 165 to win the Big Ten. Them and Ohio State, the co-favorites, exact same odds. Penn State is next, which I guess technically would be third on the list since you got a tie for first. But so Penn State and Michigan and Ohio State tied for first in order of odds to win the Big Ten at plus 165. Penn State at plus 600. National title. This is, of course, where Michigan is looking to go next. What are their odds to win a national title in 2023 for Michigan? Plus 800. Fourth best odds in the country. And you could probably guess which three teams they're behind: Georgia, Bama, and Ohio State. But yeah, Michigan, fourth best odds to win a natty at plus 800. All right, let's take a look at Michigan's roster now for 2023. We'll start on the offensive side of the ball. We'll start with the great, and that, of course, will be their running backs. Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards, probably the best 1-2 running back combo in the country for 2023. A couple other teams that have two really good running backs. Penn State comes to mind. But for my money, I'll take Corum and Edwards as the best 1-2 running back, sort of 1-2 punch in all of college football. Both had great years last year. Corum, of course, got hurt towards the end of the year. Donovan Edwards kind of stepped up. Both are healthy heading into 2023. Should be another great year for both of those guys. Now on to the good for Michigan offensively. Quarterback J.J. McCarthy. I don't think anybody thinks he's like an elite, game-changing or game-breaking type of quarterback. I mean, he's not a C.J. Stroud from last year or Caleb Williams or anything like that. But Georgia has proven over the last couple of years you don't necessarily need to be the most talented guy in the world at quarterback in order to give yourself or give your team a shot at winning a national title. And if you look at Michigan, they're kind of built around the Georgia structure, right? Good on the lines of scrimmage. Good at running the ball, really good defense, well coached, and kind of, game managey type at QB. But anyway, I like McCarthy. Another year of experience under his belt, so you would expect, again, some progression in terms of what he's able to do for you from last year to this year. And tight end, I like what they have at tight end. You have Colston. Is it Colston or Colton? Loveland. Anyway, it doesn't matter. He was impressive last year as a true freshman. He's back. He should be really, really good. You got a transfer from Indiana that comes in. Barnes, A.J. Barnes, I think his name is. I think you'll be okay at tight end. Question mark for me, offensive line and wide receiver at Michigan. Michigan has had one of, if not the best offensive lines in all of college football for the last couple of years. And while I don't expect some sort of dramatic drop-off there at the offensive line for Michigan, only 2 starters returned. You get both your guards back. You got to replace your center and both tackles. You went and got a center out of Stanford, right out of the transfer portal. He's going to start, I'm pretty sure. A.J. Barner, a transfer from Indiana, probably going to play one of the tackle spots, but we'll see. So it's kind of a work in progress along the offensive line for Michigan this year. But again, I feel like they've built up enough clout on the offensive line over the last couple of years to where we kind of have to give them the benefit of the doubt. Probably going to be pretty good. But worth pointing out, only 2 starters return from last year's offensive line. And then when you look at the wide receivers, and this to me, and Michigan fans have argued with me about this in the past. And look, I'm obviously high on Michigan. I've got them ranked number 2, right? But no team is perfect. There are weaknesses, or at least some amount of weakness on every single team, right? No matter how good a team is, some position group has to be the least talented position group, right? For me, at Michigan, it's been wide receiver. And I think that's going to be true again in 2023. There's just not really any standout playmakers at the wide receiver position for Michigan. Now, that doesn't mean that someone can't emerge in 2023. And this is, well, there's lots of things that have been interesting to me about doing these preview and prediction videos over the years, but everybody thinks that just, no one knows their team like they do. Everyone else is biased and hates their team. They're the only ones that truly know their team, right? When in reality, it's the other way around. You're more biased about your own team, in favor of your own team, then anybody else is biased against your team, myself included. Like I said, I've got Michigan at 2. I think you can make a case to have them at 1. They're probably going to be in the playoffs again in 2023, but it doesn't mean that every single starter or every single position group on this team is elite. And to me, the wide receivers are potentially an issue for Michigan offensively. Your leading returning receiver from last year is something called Cornelius Johnson. Now, I know who that is, and if you're a Michigan fan, you know who that is, but I'm just telling you, the average college football fan just doesn't know who that is. That doesn't mean he's not any good, but he's just not an elite level playmaker. He's not somebody that people are talking about constantly, like a Marvin Harrison or what a fill in the blank wide receiver from last year or whatever. Okay, they got to find some help, in my estimation, at the wide receiver position, especially when you start forecasting potential matchups down the road. And I'm talking about mostly playoff matchups, but Georgia in particular. You're not likely to beat a Georgia no matter how good Corum and Edwards are. It's just not likely to happen. If you look at Georgia's games over the last 3, 4, 5 years even, really, they've won the national title the last 2, but even going back 4 or 5 years, every game that Georgia has lost, it's been through the air offensively by the other team. Georgia just does not get beat on the ground. They don't give up rushing yards. They don't give up rushing touchdowns, and they've played really good running teams over the years. So it seems to me like Michigan, if you want to try to focus on improving something over the course of the year, with the goal being to kind of build to something in the postseason, it would be the play at wide receiver and maybe for J.J. McCarthy to become a little bit more dynamic. But overall, I still think Michigan's going to have a really good offense, a really good offensive line, and one of, if not the best ground games in the country. All right, let's take a look over on the defensive side of the ball. 6th in total defense a year ago, and 6 starters return. So you got to replace about half the defense, at least in terms of starters. But the good news is Michigan, like some of the other high-level teams who recruit really, really good year in and year out, yes, you can only have 11 people on the field at a time on defense or offense for that matter. And so technically you have 11 starters. Michigan, like some of your other top 5, top 10 teams that recruit in the top 5 or 10 every single year, play way more than 11 defensive players a year, right? There's a lot of rotating in and out that goes on defensively in college football, especially with the high-level teams who have elite-level backups. So, you might only start 2 or 3 defensive linemen, but you're playing 5 or 6. You might only start 3 or 4 linebackers, but you're playing 5 or 6. And, of course, with DBs, you're playing anywhere from, 6 to 8 to 10 different DBs in a game. Sometimes 6 DBs at the same time. We just start talking about some of these nickel and dime packages that a lot of teams like to run on defense now. So technically you lose half your starters on defense, but a ton of experience coming back. Let's start along the defensive line. Mason Graham, Chris Jenkins, they're both back. One, top 5, top 10 defensive tackle duo in the country. Both those guys have a ton of experience. Both of them really good. Both, I think, have NFL potential down the road. Senior Braden McGregor, maybe your next great outside pass rusher. We'll see if he can kind of live up to that hype this year. At linebacker, of course, all Big Ten, Junior Colson. I should have wrote this name down. I believe it's Junior Colson. Anyway, he's back. A 6-year guy. Michael Barrett is back. So again, lots of experience along the defensive front, lots of experience at the linebacker position. You look back in your secondary, defensive back, which of course will be important when you get to some of the teams that like to throw the ball, Ohio State, whatever other teams you happen to come across. Will Johnson started last year as a true freshman, and I thought played pretty good. He's back, a year of experience under his belt, and you usually see a pretty big step. When someone's good enough to play as a true freshman, that's obviously a great sign. And then you usually see a pretty significant step in what they're able to do from year 1 to year 2. That year of experience they get as a true freshman, very, very valuable. You also bring back 2 safeties with starting experience. So experience and talent at all 3 levels of the defense, even though technically you did lose half your defense, only 6 starters return. All right, now it's time to put Michigan's schedule up on the screen. We're going to go through it game by game, week by week, and I'm going to give you a winner and a loser for each game on Michigan's schedule for 2023. It's one thing to kind of look at a team, look at the coaching staff, look at the roster, who they lose, who's coming back, how have they been recruiting, what about the transfer portal, all that. then look at the schedule and go, it looks like about 10-2. It's one thing to do that. It's another thing to go, it looks like about 10-2. And I think the 2 games they're going to lose are this game and that game. That's the hard part about doing these prediction videos. We see so many weird things every year in the world of college football, right? Upsets, whatever, trap games. You don't know what sorts of injuries are going to occur, whatever. Picking the exact wins and losses becomes very difficult to do. But we attempt to do it every year, every offseason here on the channel. We're doing it again today with Michigan. Up first, East Carolina, and probably the first thing you're going to notice, and honestly, you probably notice already, it's been talked about a lot in the offseason, but this is the second year in a row that Michigan doesn't play a single Power 5 team in their non-con. Look, it is what it is, okay? Michigan is still a good team. This idea that, well, the only reason they're any good is because they, look at the non-con schedule. Of course, they're undefeated. They beat a top 25 Illinois team last year. They beat a top 10 Penn State team last year. They beat a top 5 Ohio State team last year. You can have a terrible non-con schedule and still be legitimately a good team. Now, I would like to see Michigan play at least one non-power or one Power 5 opponent in a non-con every single year. I think we all would. But for whatever reason, it hasn't worked out that way the last couple of years. They do have a home and home coming up with Texas, though. So I think this is the last year we'll have to suffer through this non-con schedule for Michigan. But East Carolina, UNLV, and Bowling Green, win. Jim Harbaugh being suspended the first 4 games. You can add Rutgers in there, too. I know that's a conference game. But these first 4 games, this is the closest you get to an NFL preseason, right? The NFL has a series. I think they've cut it back to 3 preseason games now, if I'm not mistaken. But if you could draw up sort of a college football preseason schedule that had to include at least one conference game, this would be it right here. East Carolina, UNLV, Bowling Green, and Rutgers, all at home. So you don't even have to worry about tripping up on the road at Bowling Green. All 4 home games. Michigan should start 4-0. Those will be the 4 games, of course, that Jim Harbaugh has to sit out. This is why I said at the beginning of the video, I think this is going to have little to no effect at all on the course or direction of Michigan's season, this potential Jim Harbaugh suspension. Michigan starts 4-0, no problem. Now, it does get a little bit trickier after that with back-to-back road games. And no matter how good you are or how bad the teams you're playing are, it can be tricky to play conference road games, particularly back-to-back conference road games. And you've got one at Nebraska, followed up with at Minnesota. I'm not expecting that much out of Minnesota this year, but I do think Nebraska could be one of the most improved teams in college football, at least from a record perspective. Texas A&M obviously going to have something to say about that too, coming off of a 5-win season. They could easily win 7, 8, 9 games. But anyway, I think Nebraska, this will not be an easy game. It's going to be a tough game. I think this will be one that Nebraska fans will get up for. They've been selling out games every single year, week in and week out, while they're busy not making a bowl game. They'll be excited about this game. An early test maybe for Michigan here. I think they win, though. Just too much for Nebraska. I do like Matt Rule. I think stock going up there in Nebraska immediately. I don't think you don't even have to wait. I think Nebraska is going to see an immediate improvement with the hiring of Matt Rule as head coach there. Not enough of an improvement to beat Michigan, though. I think you beat the Cornhuskers, you're 5-0. And you go on the team and beat a struggling Minnesota team, you're 6-0. They were been decent a couple of times over the last few years, but they lose Ibrahim at running back too. And don't look now, but there's some stories starting to come out. I just read this morning some stories starting to come out from former players at Minnesota under P.J. Fleck about maybe some things that were going on there. I don't know if anything's going to end up coming to this, but it sounds like kind of how the Northwestern scandal started, with former players anonymously reporting things to reporters or whatever. Now, I haven't read anything at Minnesota about even in the same universe of what was going on at Northwestern, so I don't want to alarm anybody, but I'm not going to say any more about it because I'm not sure how much is actually going to come of that. But and I don't know how much, or if anything at all, that has to do with this season. I like PJ Fleck. But Minnesota's not beating Michigan. You're 6-0. Come back home to take on Indiana, maybe the worst Power 5 team in the country last year. You'll beat them, no problem. You're 7-0. And then an in-state rivalry game. And look, Michigan State has not been very good, generally speaking, over the last few years. They had that one pop year a couple of years ago with Kenneth Walker, and they actually beat you two seasons ago, right? It was your only regular season loss. You lost to Michigan State. You went on to beat Ohio State, win the Big Ten, and make the playoffs, but you did lose 2 years ago, the last time you played on the road in East Lansing. And look, we see weird things all the time in rivalry games. Would it be the most shocking thing in the world to me if Michigan went on the road to Michigan State and lost? No, it wouldn't be the most shocking or surprising thing to me at all. In these rivalry games, sometimes anything can happen. But Michigan is a much better team than Michigan State, and I do think Michigan wins. You're undefeated heading into a late bye week here around the end of October. Come out of your bye week, and you got 4 games left, 2 on the road, 2 at home. And again, back-to-back road games. This time at Penn State and at Maryland, and that's kind of sandwiched by home games with Purdue and Ohio State. And this is a tough stretch of games here. I mean, Purdue is the reigning Big Ten West champion. Now, I'm not expecting that much from Purdue this year. They brand new coaching staff there, and honestly, even though they won the West last year, they weren't very good. But this is a tough 4 stretch of games here. I mean, Penn State and Ohio State clearly are both top 10 teams. You kind of barely beat Maryland last year at home, your second closest game of the year, really, winning that game by 7. Go on the road there, and then, of course, the home thing against Ohio State. So let's go through them game by game. I think you're going to beat Purdue at home. I'm just never that high on Purdue in any given year. I did like watching Purdue play those 2 or 3 years when they had Rondale Moore. He was very exciting. He was one of my favorite players to watch in all of college football. He's been gone for a while now, and again, a brand new coaching staff there. Felt kind of lucky to be in the Big Ten title game last year. Of course, you blew them out, and then they lost even worse to LSU in a meaningless bowl game that nobody watched. But I think you're a lot better than Purdue still. You get them at home. It's coming off a bye week. I know you play Penn State the following week, so you start to talk about some possible trap game scenarios, and this is a possible trap game, but it's one I think you escape. I think you win at home against Purdue. On the road against Penn State, I think you beat them. I think you go on the road and beat Penn State. I've done a Penn State prediction video or an Ohio State prediction video. Some of this might not be a surprise to you. I'm high on Penn State, very high on Penn State. But I think Michigan goes on the road and gets the win there late in the year. This is something that I'm assuming is going to change in the Big Ten soon, but this whole thing about not playing night games in November, now this is great for Michigan on the road at Penn State, that this game's going to get played at noon as opposed to at night, but I don't necessarily think that it would matter. If you look at this game last year, Penn State was a pretty good team last year. Penn State gets a terrible rap, by the way. They lose to Michigan and Ohio State every year, and then people say, oh, they're terrible. Yeah, they're losing to 2 top 5, 2 top 10 teams every single year. I get it. It's frustrating, especially if you're a Penn State fan, but the idea that Penn State's terrible is ridiculous. But Penn State Michigan ran for like 400 yards on Penn State last year. It was bad, really bad. Penn State would have to play way better defensively to try to keep this one close. It is at home for Penn State, and look, this might be the most dangerous game on Michigan's schedule. If you were to, in terms of percentages, there may be a higher percentage chance that Michigan loses this game on the road at Penn State than there is that they lose any other game on their schedule. And you're going to say, well, what about Ohio State? Well, that's a home game for Michigan, you know. But I think Michigan goes on the road and gets the win here at Penn State. If Michigan loses a game this year, because I think they're beating Ohio State. I don't even, I don't know, keep it a secret or whatever, but I've been saying I think Michigan beats Ohio State all offseason. I'm not changing my mind. If Michigan loses a game, so there you go. Michigan's beating Ohio State at home to end the season for the 3rd year in a row. A new quarterback at Ohio State, and like Penn State, they've just had a really hard time stopping the run of Michigan over the last couple of years. So I think Michigan runs it down Ohio State's throat, keeps it away from whoever the quarterback is and all those NFL wide receivers enough to get the win against Ohio State. If Michigan's going to lose a game this year, it's going to be on the road at Maryland. The Pineapple is back for what seems like his 20th year in college football to his younger brother there, Pineapple Jr. You have to play him on the road at Maryland. It's sandwiched between the 2 biggest games of the year for you. Penn State and Ohio State. This so much reminds me of last year's Illinois game for Michigan. They played Illinois last year right before they played Ohio State. Now, they beat Illinois, but they beat them 19-17 in a game that they very easily could have lost, right? Maryland could be this year's version of Illinois. Maryland could have a pretty good season. Now, they're obviously not as good as Michigan, Ohio State, or Penn State, and at best, they're going to finish fourth in the Big Ten East. But I would not at all be surprised to see Maryland knock off one of those big three. And this is a prime spot for Maryland to pull the upset on Michigan. This game is sandwiched between not just two of Michigan's biggest games of the year, but two of the biggest games of the year in all of college football. I think Michigan goes on the road at Maryland and catches an L. I think Michigan loses late in November to Maryland. Now, like I said, you beat Ohio State, so 11-1 with wins over Penn State and Ohio State. So that 11-1 is still going to be good enough to get you into the Big Ten title game. And if you win the Big Ten title game, you will get into the playoffs at 12-1 with a Big Ten title, third straight trip to the playoffs for Michigan if it plays out that way. So there you go. I've got Michigan at 11-1, losing late in the year on the road at Maryland. Classic trap game scheduled between that Penn State and Ohio State game. Let me know what you think down below. If you disagree, feel free to let me know. Don't just tell me they're not going 11-1, they're going 8-4. Okay, well, which four teams is it you think they're losing to? Or maybe you think they're going undefeated. You can let me know that too. Again, I'm very high on Michigan. I've got them ranked number 2 right now in my top 25 ranking. So I'm not sitting here trying to hate on Michigan. 11-1 seems like the most likely record to me. I'm not convinced that loss will come to Maryland, but, you know, when I do these prediction videos, I have to predict specific losses, so I'm going to go with a loss on the road at Maryland, but clearly they could beat Maryland and lose to Ohio State. They could beat Maryland and lose to Penn State. It's possible they lose on the road at Nebraska if Nebraska ends up being better than people think, kind of a surprise or a shocker type game. There's the rivalry game in mid-October on the road at Michigan State, and I know they're not very good, but you lost to them last time you played there, so there's 4 or 5 potential landmines, I think, here for Michigan. Michigan is good enough, I think, to navigate the majority of those. I've got Michigan at 11-1, another trip to the Big Ten title game. All right, appreciate you watching. Have a good morning.